Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to the session of Quran for Ramadan. The passage that we're going to study today is from Surah Mu'minun, which is the 22nd surah, in fact, the 23rd surah of the Quran, and we are going to study the first 11 verses of this surah. So let us start off. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون والذين هم لأماناتهم وعهدهم راعون والذين هم على صلواتهم يحافظون أولئك هم الوارثون الذين يرثون الفردوس هم فيها خالدون. Those believers succeeded who show humility in their prayer, who desist from frivolity, and who pay zakat, and who guard their private parts, except for their wives and slave maidens, because in their case there is no blame on them. Indeed, those who desire others besides them, it is they who exceed the limits. And those who give due regard to their trusts and to their promises, and those who guard their prayers. It is these people who will be masters, who are the masters of Firdaus. They shall abide in it forever. Viewers, this is a very compelling passage from Surah Mu'minun, and as you can see, it describes the success in the hereafter and how people or Muslims or believers in this world, if they have certain traits, they will definitely succeed in the hereafter. One thing that you might have noted in the very first verse is that it is in the past tense, as if the believers who have these traits have already succeeded. So the words are قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, believers have succeeded. This is a very special style of the Arabic language in which at times future events which are certain to happen, they are mentioned in the past tense as if they have already happened. So in order to convey the certainty of an event, a future event, it is at times portrayed as a past event in order to just mention and indicate this fact that it is bound to happen. And exactly it is the same case here, that those believers have succeeded. I mean, it is like saying they have already succeeded. And who are those? So the first trait which is mentioned about them is الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. So these are the believers who show humility in the prayer. And this, of course, is a very compact and a very comprehensive attribute, which means that they are humble in their prayer, they regard God with full focus and attention. Their own prayer is such that it makes them realize that they are the ones who are thanking the Almighty for His blessings and at the same time acknowledging His greatness. So if you look at the postures of the prayer, you can see that they themselves portray this humility. When you kneel before someone, when you prostrate before someone, it cannot be for any other reason than to show regard and respect. And especially prostration, in which you actually place the highest point of your body, which is your forehead, on the ground. It is like acknowledging someone's greatness. And this is precisely what we do. And this is exactly becoming of us as well. It's most befitting because we realize that we as humble creatures, as creatures who are bound to make mistakes and faults, who have a lot of shortcomings, we need God's help to overcome these shortcomings. And at the same time, we need to thank God for all His blessings. So we place our forehead on the ground and we pray to Him and we acknowledge Him. And viewers, you will find this very interesting to note as well, that this is a posture that can be done or should be done other than the prayer as well. So when you prostrate before the Almighty without the prayer, do it at any place, you'll find a certain calmness, a certain comfort in your own self. And this is an antidote to a lot of things that we might be facing in life. So if you face any down feeling, if you face any depression or low feeling, this is a good antidote, that just prostrate yourself before the Almighty. It should not be, you don't need to do wuzu for that as well. You just prostrate before the Almighty, and you'll find that soothing feeling coming to you immediately, because now you are humbling yourself before God. Now you're presenting your own petition to God in the form of that beautiful posture. The next thing which is mentioned in these verses is وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. They are people who desist from frivolity. So frivolity, of course, is something which is absolutely unbecoming, something which people should not partake in any sense these are activities that lead us away from God. These are activities that lead us away from our own responsibilities. So all those activities which make us irresponsible, regardless of this responsibility, whether it is because of God that we become irresponsible or to our own society, these have to be avoided. These are frivolities which take the better of us at times, and we don't realize that while we are indulging in them, we are simply wasting, not only wasting our time, effort, and energy, but at the same time, we are also tarnishing the mirror of our soul. So, one example of indulging in such frivolities is is to talk in a way, is to converse in a way in which your conversation is full of nonsensical abuses or small talk, which is either harassing other people or it has absolutely no meaning. So some of these things have to be kept in mind, that a believer, a person who is close to God, he has to or she has to guard his or her tongue or mouth from uttering such nonsensical things. And then the next thing which is mentioned is وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. So these are believers who are absolutely ardent, who are very particular in paying their zakat. So this is a very important area that we all need to realize, that at times we do not calculate our zakat the way we should, and we just do it out of an estimate, a rough guess that we make. This would not be a very correct or a precise behavior on our part. So just as the prayer, the namaz, the salat that we offer, we always know what we are doing, we know the number of rakat, we know the time. On a very similar note, we need to also calculate zakat in a very precise way. And because you see, it's an obligation. You might be paying over and above what is due on you, but still you need to know how much zakat is due. For example, it could be the fact that you are paying much, you're already spending much more in charity than zakat, and in that way you would have that assurance that, well, you can have that leverage that you have, or that window that you have for the next year as well. So zakat, of course, on savings is paid once a year, and on production is paid on every time that production takes place. And you can clearly see that this is an age-old ritual. I mean, it was something which began with the ancient prophets, the previous prophets. It did not begin like the prayer with Prophet Muhammad. This is a common misconception. So zakat, salat, hajj, you can see it was being offered in the times of Abraham, and the house of God was built. So all these worship rituals that we know today, they are ancient worship rituals. They were offered by previous prophets of God as well. And because of the fact that this is a Meccan surah, Surah Mu'minun is a Meccan surah, it clearly shows that this is something that was already there even in the Meccan times. So to be a person who is vigilant and diligent in his duty towards God, it is essential in all such instances that we do calculate precisely the zakat which is due on us, and we disperse it. The next thing which is mentioned is وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ إِلَّا عَلَىٰ أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ فَمَنِ ابْتَغَىٰ وَرَاءَ ذَٰلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. So these three verses actually mention the one single thing, and that is that believers are those who do not indulge in any sexual activity with any third person, with any person in fact, other than their own wives. So this is something which the Quran has said, that you cannot have any sexual activity with anyone but your wife. And of course, in those times, since slavery was allowed for a certain period of time before it was totally eradicated, so yes, this allowance was given for slave maidens as well. But we have discussed this at a number of occasions, on a number of talks as well, that slavery was something which was inherited by Islam and the Prophet himself. And because it was deeply rooted in our society, it was gradually done away with. And it was right near the end of the Prophet's ministry when it was totally proscribed. And in that period, it was given sanctity because it was, as I said, very, very deeply rooted in the society. And a single order of its implementation would have resulted in a lot of problems. The slave maidens, they would have taken up to prostitution, and men would have become beggars in the society, because they were virtually those people or those individuals who did not have any skill. So they were gradually trained and then set free. But during that time, of course, the ancient Arab custom in which slave women were kept by men, and they of course had sexual intimacy with them, that was allowed. But as soon as that last stage arrived, they were set free, and any slave who wanted that he or she be freed or emancipated, then it was incumbent upon the masters to do so. And we'll of course discuss more when we have this topic or this topic discussed in our own sequence. But just to give you this important notion that here the Quran is referring to the fact that any sexual activity out of wedlock is absolutely prohibited for all believers. All their sexual intimacies are definitely reserved for their own spouses. فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. These are the words which actually sound this warning. And they say that those who exceed these limits, I mean those who desire anyone besides them, they are the ones who exceed their limits, which means that if you cross your marriage boundary and you go to someone else, then you are exceeding the limits. And the Almighty says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. They are the ones who would transgress, which will of course not sit well with the Almighty. The next thing which is mentioned again is something very, very, it's like an eye-opener for all of us. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِأَمَانَاتِهِمْ وَعَهْدِهِمْ رَاعُونَ. And those who give due regard to their trusts and to their promises. So once again, this is a very strong reminder that when we give our word to someone and when someone entrusts something to us, we have to be absolutely honest. We must honor the word that we give. We might have some excuse, or we might have some legitimate excuse. In that case, we must communicate that excuse to the person in case we are not able to honor our commitment. But to honor a promise, to honor a commitment is something that is a given. It just cannot be otherwise. And if there is something that has come up, of course, you need to revise your commitment and convey it to the other person. Otherwise, you have to be a person who is honorable. An honorable person is one who always honors his commitment. And remember, our own covenant with the Almighty, the agreement that we have entered when we follow His religion is also an agreement. It's also like a promise. So we have promised the Almighty our obedience and to follow Him at all cost. And therefore, this is something that has to be understood, that this is a very broad word. It just does not include the promises that we give through our own words. All those promises which are understood to have been done, they also are implied. As I said, our promise, of course, with our own parents does not need any mention, but it is a given that we are going to treat them with kindness. Similarly, our promise with the Almighty is that we are going to follow and be obedient to Him. So, although it might not be properly given at one instance, but obviously, whenever we enter this world and we become mature enough, this is something of an understood undertaking. And to be a person who is always always honoring His word is something that we need to take special care of, because you see, this is one area in which we believers, we Muslims, are very weak, and we don't realize that we are very generous in making commitments without realizing that there are many commitments that we might not be able to fulfill. So it is better to say no than to be dishonorable in our commitments. The next thing which is mentioned here is وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَىٰ صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. These are those who guard their prayers. Now, this is especially said here because you see, five times we have to pray, and the times of the prayer are also fixed. So guarding one's prayer has also a very wide meaning, but it starts off with the fact that you have to guard the time of the prayer as well. So once the time of the prayer begins, it should come naturally to us that it's a responsibility that now we owe to the Almighty, and instead of procrastinating and delaying the prayer, the best thing is to offer it as soon as one has the time and as soon as the time begins. And also included in this protection is the fact that we should offer the prayer in a way that every part of the prayer is given its due time and its due regard. So, for example, when we are kneeling or prostrating or standing up, each posture should be done in a very gradual way, in a very smooth way, in a way that every posture has its proper time. And at the same time, whatever we utter in the prayer should be known to us. Otherwise, our thoughts are bound to wander, and the way they wander, we all know in the prayer that in the prayer we do all sorts of calculations and everything, and things that we don't even do when we're not praying, they start invading our thoughts. So one of the good things to know in this regard is that we concentrate on the meanings of the prayer. That is something which will keep our attention focused. So it is said, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَىٰ صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. These are the people who guard their prayers. And an important thing that we might also need to know here is that besides timing and besides knowing what the content, the second or the third important thing in this regard, which includes in this protection of the prayer, is to be punctual and at the same time be vigilant. I mean, it should not be the case that we start offering the prayer and then after a few days maybe or a few months we give them up or we fall short on them. So it's like a persistent thing. You have to be constantly in this loop. And the best thing that keeps you in that loop is that we acknowledge that this prayer is basically an expression of our gratefulness to the Almighty, our gratitude to the Almighty. The way He has shown His favor and mercy on us, the way He has looked after us, the way He has provided for us, the way He is still looking after us is something which is a realization that should come to us naturally. And when we pray, we are actually thanking Him for that. So, with all these traits, the Quran has summed up and said, "Ulaika humul warisun allazina yarisun al-firdausa hum fiha khalidun," that these are the people who will be the masters or who are the masters of Firdaus, which of course is the name of paradise, and they are the ones who are going to live there. And the good news here is that they shall abide there forever. They shall be there forever. It will be everlasting bliss, and this is something which is a big future that awaits us, and the only thing that we need to do is to follow what we have just seen in these first 14 or 11 verses of Surah Mu'minun. So with that we come to an end to today's session, and we are now going to open up our forum for any questions.
Sir, my question is that as we are studying Surah Al-Mu'minun and we started with the mention of prayers, and then we end it with protection of the prayers or guarding the
Right.
prayers. But in between, we see that there are a lot of other manners that are mentioned that should be followed as a protocol. So my question here is, there must be a specificity of why the prayer was mentioned firstly, and then it
Right.
was said that the prayer should be guarded, especially. So you also mentioned that there is quite another meaning and in-depth meaning of that. I would like to know that meaning.
So you see, it's a very, very pertinent question, and this is something which happens in the Quran at many instances, that if there is some important directive and that directive is given in a certain way besides other directives, and if it has some special importance, then what the Quran does is it starts off with that directive and it ends on that directive, as if it is encircling the whole group of directives with a wall. So the importance that the prayer occupies in Islam is something which becomes evident from this. It started off with the prayer. Of course, one aspect of the prayer was mentioned, and that is that they are ones who are humble in the prayer. That is just one aspect. And then we had a bunch of other directives, and once these set of directives were to end, they did not end on another directive. They ended on the first directive. I mean, they started with the prayer and they are now ending with the prayer, and with a different connotation or a different sense. The starting off with the prayer was that they are humble in the prayer, and the ending point was that they guard their prayer. So basically, I mean, both have their own nuances, and being humble in the prayer I just explained. Guarding the prayer, of course, has the depth in meaning in which you are guarding the times, you are guarding your own punctuality, and you're guarding your own attention from going astray. So all these aspects they are incorporated in that word. But the important thing here is the mention of the word salat at the beginning and the end, which actually tells the importance of the ritual itself. So if you would like to have some more information, you might like to know this, that the importance which monotheism or tawheed has in our beliefs, it is the fundamental belief. So in our deeds, the most important deed is that of salat or namaz or prayer. So just as in our beliefs, the most important belief is tawheed or monotheism, in a very similar way, the most important deed before God is the prayer. Of course, if it is uttered in the way the Quran has specified it. And one thing that I'd like to add here is that the prayer and all worship rituals are not an end in themselves. They are a means to an end, and that is to become a better person. So these rituals, whenever they are mentioned so that when we go through them, when we offer them, we become more connected to God and to humanity. So basically, these worship rituals are meant as stepping stones, if I use this word. They are basically a means to achieve something greater. So this is how the prayer has been placed, that it is something which is meant for us to not only get elevated to God, get attached to God, but at the same time realize that this is a collective instance of thanksgiving as well to the Almighty. And this is something which the prayer makes us realize.
سر مجھے آپ سے یہ کوشچن پوچھنا تھا کہ کیا ہم ان کمپنیز یا پھر ان بڑے بڑے برانڈس کو بائیکاٹ کر سکتے ہیں جو وار کی سچویشن میں جو ہے وہ ظالموں کے ساتھ کھڑے ہوں، اور وہ ظلم کسی بھی وہ سپورٹ کسی بھی ٹائپ کی ہو سکتی ہے، فائنینشلی سپورٹ کرنا ہو سکتا ہے یا پھر ان کے ظلم کا دفاع کر کے
ہوں
سپورٹ کرنا ہو سکتا ہے.
ہوں
تو ان کمپنیز کے اندر نا ہمارے فرینڈس یا پھر کچھ جو ہمارے
ہوں
مسلم بھائی ہوتے ہیں وہ بھی امپلائیز ہوتے ہیں، تو ایسی سچویشن میں کیا ہم ان
ہوں
کمپنیز ان برانڈس کو بائیکاٹ کر سکتے ہیں؟
اس طرح کا جو کوئی اقدام ہے، اس کا افیکٹ اور امپیکٹ تبھی ہوگا کہ جب یہ ملکی لیول پہ ہو. آپ چند لوگ اگر بائیکاٹ کریں گے تو اس سے کوئی نقصان ہو سکتا ہے آپ کو ہو جائے، کیونکہ کوئی اہم پروڈکٹ ہے جو آپ کے اپنے استعمال کی ہے، جس کو آپ یوز کر رہے ہیں اور اس سے اپنے آپ کو محروم کر رہے ہیں. تو اس وجہ سے اگر کوئی اس طرح کا قدم افیکٹو ہونا ہے تو وہ ایسے ہی ہونا چاہیے کہ مسلم امہ کے لیول پہ یا بڑے بڑے ملکوں کے لیول پہ وہ فیصلہ کریں کہ بھی فلاں گروہ نے اگر فلاں زیادتی کی ہے تو ہم اس سے فلاں چیز میں تعاون نہیں کریں گے. پھر تو اس کا ایک امپیکٹ ہوگا، ان کی کلائنٹیل شاید کم ہو اور اس کا کوئی افیکٹ ہو. لیکن یہ اکا دکا لوگ، یعنی چند ہزار لوگ بھی ہو جائیں، چند لاکھ لوگ بھی ہو، جس طرح کا بائیکاٹ اگر کر لیں، اس سے آپ اپنا ہی نقصان شاید کر بیٹھیں، لیکن جو آپ چاہ رہے ہیں کہ دوسروں کو ریئلائز کرائیں وہ ریئلائز نہیں ہوگا. اس وجہ سے اگر یہ کوئی قدم اٹھانا چاہے تو پھر یہ ریاست کے لیول پہ، بلکہ بہت ساری ریاستوں کے لیول پہ کوئی اگر اس طرح کا فیصلہ ہو تو شاید فائدہ مند ہو، ورنہ انڈیویجولی اس کا کوئی خاص فائدہ نہیں ہے. اور جیسے میں نے کہا کہ ممکن ہے کہ بہت سارے ایسے پروڈکٹ جو آپ کے اپنے فائدے کے ہیں وہ ان سے آپ اپنے آپ کو محروم کر لیں.
سرفراز پلیز انمیوٹ یور مائک.
السلام علیکم ڈاکٹر صاحب، مجھے ایک چیز پوچھنی تھی. سورہ قمر کے حوالے سے جو ترجمہ بنتا ہے اس میں تھوڑا اختلاف پایا جاتا ہے. بہت سے لوگ کہتے ہیں
ہوں
کہ یہ آخرت کے حوالے سے، بہت سے لوگ کہتے ہیں کہ نہیں یہ
ہوں
اسی وقت ہوا تھا. اور اگر یہ اس طرح سے بریک ہوا تھا اور اس کی وہ کوئی
ہوں
حدیث بھی کرتے ہیں کہ معمار میں کسی بادشاہ نے دیکھا، تو پوری دنیا کو، آدھی دنیا کو تو دیکھنا چاہیے تھا. اور پھر اگر
ہوں
چاند بریک ہوگا تو زلزلہ آئے گا یا کوئی آفت آئے
جی
گی، کوئی مسئلہ کھڑا ہونا چاہیے تھا جو کہ ریکارڈ میں،
ہوں
ہسٹری میں ہونا چاہیے تھا. تو وہ چیز عقل اس کو تسلیم نہیں کرتی. آپ کی اس کے بارے میں کیا رائے ہے؟
جی دیکھیں، عقل کا تو ہم بعد میں فیصلہ کریں گے. قرآن مجید کے جو الفاظ ہیں وہ تو بہت حتمی ہیں. وہ تو یہ کہتے ہیں اقتربت الساعۃ وانشق القمر، کہ یہ چاند جو تھا وہ دو ٹکڑے ہو گیا تھا نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کے اپنے زمانے میں. اور یہ کوئی نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کا کوئی معجزہ نہیں تھا، بلکہ اللہ تعالیٰ کی طرف سے ایک نشانی تھی. وَإِن يَرَوْا آیَةً يُعْرِضُوا وَيَقُولُوا سِحْرٌ مُسْتَمِرٌ. اگلی آیت ہی یہی ہے کہ یہ جو کفار ہیں ان کو کوئی بھی نشانی دکھا لیں، انہوں نے اعراض ہی کرنا ہے اور یہ کہنا ہے کہ یہ جادو ہے، چلا آ رہا ہے. تو بنیادی طور پہ اللہ تعالیٰ یہ کرتے ہیں جو نبوت کے ادوار میں مختلف نبیوں کو کے زمانے میں بڑی بڑی نشانیاں دکھاتے ہیں ان لوگوں کو یہ بتانے کے لیے کہ اللہ تعالیٰ کی قدرت ہے جو کہ یہ فیصلہ کر رہی ہے. اور چونکہ اس زمانے کے جو مشرکین تھے وہ یہ اعتراض کرتے تھے اور وہ یہ کہتے تھے کہ بھئی ہم جب مٹی میں مر مٹ جائیں گے تو دوبارہ کیسے اٹھائے جائیں گے، اور یہ کیسے ایک نئی دنیا بنے گی، اور کیسے یہ سارے کے سارے ستارے اور چاند اور پہاڑ ختم ہو جائیں گے. تو یہ اللہ تعالیٰ نے اپنی قوت کا مظاہرہ کیا، اور یہ بالکل مومنٹری تھا. یعنی یہ معلوم یہ ہوتا ہے کہ مومنٹری تھا، کچھ عرصے کے لیے ہوا، کچھ لوگوں نے اس کو دیکھا. بلکہ وہ لوگ جو مکے میں موجود تھے انہوں نے کہا ہم تب مانیں گے اگر ہمیں پتہ چلے کہ ہماری آنکھوں نے دھوکہ نہیں کھایا. تو جو باہر سے لوگ آتے ہیں ان سے پوچھتے ہیں. تو یہ پھر یہ اس طرح کی ہسٹری میں بات آتی ہے کہ جو لوگ باہر سے مکے میں آ رہے تھے تو انہوں نے اس کو خود بھی وٹنس کیا. اور رہ گئی یہ بات کہ یہ ریکارڈ میں کیوں نہیں آیا، تو ریکارڈ میں تو وہ تب آتا ہے نا کہ جب کوئی چیز پریڈکٹڈ ہو اور آپ اس کے لیے ٹیونڈ ہوتے ہیں اور آپ آسمان کو دیکھ رہے ہوتے ہیں. تو ہر وقت لوگ آسمان کو نہیں دیکھ رہے ہوتے، اور اس وجہ سے یہ بہت ساری تاریخوں میں نہیں ہے. لیکن مالابار کی تاریخ اگر آپ پڑھیں تو اس میں آپ کو نظر آئے گا کہ ایک شہزادے نے، ایک راجہ کہہ لیں، انہوں نے اپنے کنگڈم کے بادشاہ تھے، انہوں نے اس چیز کو وٹنس کیا اور اپنے ہاں اس کو ریکارڈ بھی کرایا. اس طرح کے بعض اور شواہد بھی ملتے ہیں. لیکن نٹ شیل ہم یہ کہہ سکتے ہیں کہ بنیادی طور پہ قرآن مجید سے یہ بالکل واضح ہے کہ یہ ایک اللہ تعالیٰ نے ایک نشانی کے طور پہ کہ ان کی قدرت جو ہے وہ انسانوں کو اس جگہ پہ لے جا سکتی ہے کہ دنیا تباہ کرے اور پھر ایک نئی دنیا بنائے. کیونکہ ظاہر یہ عام واقعہ تو نہیں ہے. تو مشرکین چونکہ اعتراض یہی کرتے تھے تو ان کے اس اعتراض کے جواب میں یہ واقعہ دکھایا گیا. اس کو عام طور سے نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کے معجزے کے طور پہ پورٹرے کیا جاتا ہے کہ جیسے انہوں نے اشارہ کیا اور چاند دو ٹکڑے ہو گیا. یہ مبالغہ ہے اور یہ ان میں روایات میں بہت خلط مبس ہوا. یہ روایتیں ٹھیک نہیں ہیں جو یہ بیان کرتی ہیں. جو اس وقت کے آئی وٹنسز ہیں جو بیان کرتے ہیں وہ تو وہی ہے کہ شاید چند سیکنڈ کے لیے معاملہ ہوا اور وہ چاند جو ہے وہ دو ٹکڑے ہوا، پھر دوبارہ جا کے مل گیا. اور سائنس کی یہ نارسائی ہے کہ اس وقت وہ ڈسکور نہیں کر سکا. مجھے کامل یقین ہے کہ آئندہ ادوار میں کبھی جب ہم مزید ترقی کر جائیں گے سائنس میں اور اسٹرانومی میں اور کاسمولوجی میں، تو شاید آپ کو یہ بھی خبر مل جائے کہ ہاں یہ واقعہ ہوا تھا اور اس کے آثار و شواہد مل گئے ہیں.
Sir, my question is on the concept of zakat. I heard there was a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that he said that paying zakat once is better than giving sadaqah for the entire year, that the reward would be much greater. But what if you are not zakat legible and you do give a lot of sadaqah, but you are not eligible to give zakat? Are you still allowed to give zakat with the intention of giving zakat for the reward?
I mean, this is a narrative which is situational. Always remember that the narratives of the Prophet, they are not, they are mostly not for an absolute situation. They don't give an absolute verdict on a particular issue. They are more situational. I mean, the Prophet would be answering a particular person in his own background with some other details, and many a time the narrators they either mix up these details or they don't even mention them. So what we can clearly see from the Quran is that as far as a person is concerned, unless he is eligible to pay zakat, of course, he would not be paying zakat. He would be receiving zakat, and which is quite a normal thing because the Almighty has made people such that there are some people who are rich, there are other people who are poor, and this balance between rich and the poor, it continues. So the way the Almighty would like people to go about this is that the rich people are required to give a share of their money to the poor people. So this is a general scheme of the Almighty. So in this general scheme, there are bound to be some people who are receiving it and there are bound to be some people who are giving it. So I mean, it depends to which group we belong to. And this is what the Quran has told us in a very firm way. Other than that, what we get to know through certain narratives, as I said, it is mostly situational and it cannot be extended to these general situations. It's always specific. And for that specific, we need to have more details. I mean, you just cannot pick up one sentence or one sort of lesson from that narrative because, as I said, there is a whole bunch of things which is mentioned earlier on or omitted for that matter.
Thank you. Rafia, you may ask your question now.
Dr. Shehzad, I know you have discussed slavery and the abolishing of slavery slowly in Islam, but the thing that bothers me, that Quran is the word of God and the book from God. And when it actually mentions that you're allowed to have relations with your wife and slave girls, it does bother you. And is there any place later in the Quran where it says that no, now you cannot have these relationships with your slave girls? Because it's difficult to explain why the Quran would allow this and mention it.
You see, the first and most important thing is that the customs and the traditions that we are used to are at times so different from they were earlier on. Something which is very, something which looks very odd to us was part of the society many centuries ago, and it did not look odd at all. So the difficulty that you are having is that, in today's society, this is something of an anathema, it's something of a sin, and of course it is. So you need to understand that in the times of the Prophet, there were scores and scores of slaves that were kept in every house, and the Quran made a very frantic first step. It took a very frantic first step by saying that no new slaves would be made. So the first thing that it did was that it stopped all new slaves from becoming slaves, because the way that these slaves would be made would be that they would be captured, free people would be captured as prisoners of war, and they would be enslaved. So the first step which our religion took was that it said that whenever you capture someone, you have to set that prisoner free, either with ransom or without ransom. So the first step that Islam took was that any new slave could not enter the slave markets. Now what happened is that existing slaves which were part of the society, they were to be done away with in a very gradual way because they were rampant in the society. And as I said earlier on, any immediate order of setting them free would have resulted in a lot of problems, because these slave maidens, they were given to prostitution. Their own masters would force them to prostitution, and had they been set free, they would have opened prostitution dens in the society. Men were generally unskilled, and had they been just set free, they would have caused a lot of economic burden. So Islam adopted a very gradual process of emancipating the slaves, and I have given several talks on this. I think you will be part of those talks as well. But to cut the long story short, we have to understand that this was something that Islam inherited, and it was, of course, a stigma on its face, the way it has been presented, because people still think that Islam gives sanctions to slavery, and today even if we have war, we can capture prisoners of war and make them slaves. But very earlier on, as I said, right at the Battle of Badr, this was actually prohibited and proscribed. So for that, you need to understand the dynamics of that society. And until slavery was totally abolished, its general upkeep, or the way it was held in the Arab society, it was not tampered with, and that was that men would never have sexual relations with their women masters, but on the contrary, men who were masters would have these relations with their slave maidens. Prophet Muhammad had a slave lady by the name of Maria. She was gifted to him by the king of Egypt, and she was kept with him. Ibrahim, their son, was born from him, and the Prophet actually elevated her in the sense that he treated her as a wife. She was not a wife; he did not marry her, but virtually she lived as a wife or in the status of a wife. And with that, the Prophet wanted to demonstrate that as long as these women are not set free, they have to be treated almost with the same status as a wife. So this is a very, very comprehensive topic which we have covered elsewhere. I think I've tried to cover it in a very brief way in this small session, but as I said, that you can look up some of the details that I have already given elsewhere.
Assalamu alaikum. So I wanna ask a question about yesterday's lesson, the verses of Surah Furqan. The servants of the merciful are those who never participate in any evil, and when they have to pass by a frivolous thing, they pass with dignity. And you further explained that they have nothing to do with it, like if something happening against the humanity, they pass by it without doing anything because they have nothing to do with it. So I didn't get it because what if we have the power to stop that evil from happening, or if we have the capability to stop that evil? Let me give an example. For example, if we see some fighting two people, like and I pass by them, so I have the power to stop them from fighting, and I don't.
Correct.
Like I
Right.
pass by it. So
Right.
shouldn't it would be my responsibilities to stop them?
So you see, the word lagh is used there. It does not relate to these instances like fighting or maybe things that you can solve on your own or you are able to play your own part. That's not what was meant there. Frivolity is something which is lagh. Lagh means some useless activity, something which is absolutely useless. So fight is not a useless activity. It's something which is going on, and if you're able to stop it, you should play your role. So you see, it's not correctly put when you say that anything which is against humanity. That is not what lagh is. The correct meaning of lagh is anything which is absolutely useless. I mean, anything which is just wasting your time or effort or money in any way. That is what is lagh. But the example that you have given is something different. And if you can, of course, you should play your role. So because that does not come in the word lagh. Lagh is something, as I said, is something absolutely useless.